good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar launching The Promise of Higher Education, Essays in Honor of 70 Years of IAU. It is a wonderful honor to be speaking to you today with of our distinguished guests, and that is Adam Habib coming in a little bit later, Charles Hopkins, Roberta, Malee, Bassett, Enakshi Sengupta, and indeed Stacy Kennedy. It is a wonderfully international gathering today from various places around the world. Roberta is speaking to us from Zurich Airport. Stacy is speaking to us on her travels in between Barbados and Jamaica. We have Enakshi speaking to us from India, indeed, and Chuck Hopkins from Canada. We have this is the second part of our launching of this book, and yeah, we had 2 days ago already a wonderful session which was on coding the values of higher education, and this time we would like to look into the future and into a sustainable future, and then to look into what the higher education landscape might look like in the future and what we need to do in order to get there. For this, we have invited these speakers, and of course, you know, we had 82 contributors to this wonderful book, and not, as you can imagine, not everyone has the opportunity to speak. So we have hoped that all of you who are out there and are tuned in today for this to come in at also a later stage during the Q&A, where we will have ample time and ample opportunity also to raise your views, your opinions, your questions, and let's hope for a very vibrant discussion at that stage. Yes, without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Stacy Kennedy. Indeed, she is speaking to us from Barbados, and she is the Pro Vice Chancellor of Global Affairs and the Director of the Office of Global Partnerships and Sustainable Futures, a very important title indeed. And we're very, very glad to have been cooperating with the University of the West Indies for quite some time now. The UWI serves as the lead on the SDG 13 climate action in our IAU Global Cluster on HESD, which means the IAU's Higher Education and Research for Sustainable Development Program, which promotes the role of higher education globally and their work towards achieving the SDGs and Agenda 2030. Without further ado, Stacy Kennedy, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and warm greetings from the University of the West Indies to all speakers and participants. Permit me at the onset to congratulate again the IAU on this milestone 70th anniversary, and to say what an honor it was for our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, and I to contribute to this historic IAU publication on the promise of higher education. Our article focused on how higher education in the Caribbean is being reimagined. And let me just start off by saying universities across the globe have responded to the current COVID-19 pandemic by mobilizing scientific, psychosocial, and pedagogical expertise at a rapid pace. This was done in record time and has demonstrated and reaffirmed how critical universities are to securing both the present and future needs of societies. However, as the world continues to grapple with this pandemic, the Caribbean, small island states in particular, have experienced further exacerbation of the vulnerability of their economies. And in many instances, what we have experienced and witnessed is that the mobilization of public and private resources to save lives and livelihoods has meant increased debt levels and the stagnation of critical developmental projects, putting increased pressure on public universities in our region and by and large in across the global south. So as we look into the future, these are some fundamental questions that we have posed in our article. Firstly, how do universities foresee higher education meeting the future needs of individuals and society? Secondly, will universities be agile enough to undertake the rapid organizational transformation necessary for their continued relevance and survival? And thirdly, will there be a sustained commitment to invest in higher education as the bedrock of human enlightenment, justice, peace, and progress? The article goes on to historicize these issues by reflecting on the context in which Caribbean universities operate. As you know, the Caribbean education system itself is a product of the region's history, which has been shaped by exploitation, slavery, and colonialism for centuries. Thus, the residual structural inequity in Caribbean society also manifests itself in the education system. And therefore, when you look at the studies and the statistics with regard to higher education enrollment in the hemisphere, we see that the Caribbean's tertiary enrollment rate is less than 25% as compared with North America, which is closer to 60%, and Latin America at 52%. Now, the vestiges of slavery and indentureship are also visible in the health challenges that afflict Caribbean people. There have been numerous studies that document the extent to which chronic non-communicable diseases, such as diabetes and hypertension, disproportionately affect Caribbean people. So according to the Caribbean Public Health Agency, more than 76% of total deaths in non-Latin Caribbean countries were due to non-communicable diseases. Now, so as we work through the article, what is being presented is a case that shows how there is a convergence between the COVID-19 pandemic, chronic diseases, and also the climate crisis. Now, in the small island developing states of the Caribbean, we face on a daily basis, and we recognize that we are on the front line of the climate crisis. Between 2017 and 2019, there were 3 mega hurricanes, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Maria, and Hurricane Dorian, which all had a devastating impact on countries across the region. So the damage caused by hurricanes Irma and Maria was estimated at almost $100 billion US, which meant that the gross domestic product of certain countries was decimated. So we have estimates that of the damage from these hurricanes that reflect that in Dominica, as much as 225% of the GDP was wiped out. In case of the British Virgin Islands, it was more than 300% of GDP. And in the case of Anguilla, nearly 100%. So here we are in a region that recognizes that the COVID pandemic has converged with chronic diseases and climate change as the 3rd deadly sea for the Caribbean. And earlier this year, we saw in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where our brothers and sisters living there, in addition to dealing with the public health and economic impacts of the pandemic, also had to deal with a volcanic eruption, severe ashfall, and the relocation of communities across the island. And then a few weeks later, over 200 roofs being blown off by a tropical storm. So it is a significant time of strain and challenge for the small island states in the Caribbean, but the great disruption caused by the pandemic, converging with public health and the climate crisis, this disruption has also opened doors for change and transformation. And so the second part of the article looks to the future, and it explains that there is an aggressive and deliberate search for more sustainable financial models for Caribbean universities, looking at diversification of product, price, pedagogy, and partnerships. And all of these will need to be pursued while at the same time maintaining a steadfast commitment to quality and access. Caribbean universities have already begun upgrading their offering with new digital technologies, robust and integrated business enterprise systems, expanded online and blended teaching and learning, complemented by targeted experiential learning opportunities for students. And this emerging model will thus take into account the new possibilities generated by digital transformation and artificial intelligence, things related to blockchain technology and other evolutions of digital technologies. It will also incorporate increased access, self-paced learning, quick reskilling and retooling of adult learners, as well as greater diversity and portability of certification through micro and digital credentialing. So there's no doubt that in this new evolving landscape, we have to also keep our eye firmly on the issue of digital inclusion to bridge the digital divide and therefore continue to see this as a central mission of all Caribbean universities and universities across the global South. As the future of universities unfolds, Caribbean universities, which were established primarily as developmental universities to contribute to strengthening democracy in the post-independent period, shall remain true to their mission. And we see this, we hold this really firmly and dearly to the University of the West Indies because of the role that we have played in revitalizing Caribbean development for over 7 decades. No doubt this will entail reinventing the academy as a more agile and effective institution to better serve the evolving needs of the workforce and of the wider society. Equally important, however, will be the university's ability to provoke a shift in regional and global development paradigms as a pathway to more just, more inclusive, and more sustainable futures for all. So I'll end there, and I thank you for the opportunity to share a bit about our article. Back to you, Andreas.
Thank you very much, Stacy. That was a very welcome overview over the situation and the future of the universities in the Caribbean, and indeed very rich. I would normally just move on to our next speaker as we had agreed, and then take questions at the end. But just for all of you to be informed that unfortunately Stacy, as she is on her way to Jamaica, she needs to travel. So I'd like to put a question to her now, in the hope that she will then also later be able to stay with us also for the Q&A. But just one question now. It's a very interesting the title, Accelerating the Future into the Present, and then reimagining higher education, and that there's a certain tension there, of course, in the title itself, because accelerating to the future means that it's kind of something, it kind of implies something is already inevitable, something that will happen anyway in the future, has just been accelerated through the pandemic and is now here. At the same time, you're also speaking of reimagining, right? So a change, something that will come, that needs to be newly defined and developed. And thank you very much, really, also for showing and telling us how important the university in the Caribbean are for as an agency of and for development. So my question to you is really, what do you think is there to stay? What has the future brought into the present, so to speak, and what needs to be reimagined?
Absolutely. Thanks for that question, Andreas. And you're spot on. What would have seemed on the horizon and something that we would have been looking at and planning for and doing visioning exercises around for years ahead, that has been totally turned on its head, and it's happening now. And so from our strategic engagements and strategic planning exercises, we've just come out of retreat with the executive management across the University of the West Indies. And we are talking about things that we would have had on our horizon, we're dealing with now, and we have to accelerate, and we have to just shorten that time frame so that we can put the necessary measures in place to deal with this disruption in terms of how we bring increased access to students, how we incorporate digital transformation, not just in the delivery of programs and teaching and learning, but also to provide for business continuity and academic continuity in our own operations. So it's very much building the bridge as you walk on it, because it's no longer, the pandemic has really turned things around. And thankfully, our university has been agile and been able to transition because we had an open university among our 5 campuses. But now, as we reimagine the future, we have to now think through what else, how do we futurize pedagogy? How do we future-proof the university? And that horizon is no longer 10, 15 years, it's 3 to 5 years. And I'll pause there.
Thank you, Stacy. Excellent. Thank you very, very much. And I think many universities can sympathize with your analogy, building the bridge while you're walking on it. That is indeed something that I think many colleagues are experiencing indeed. Without further ado, we'd like to move to our next distinguished speaker, Chuck Hopkins. He holds the UNESCO chair in reorientating education towards sustainability, and he is at York University in Toronto in Canada. And again, we're very, very glad to know that York University is part of our global cluster, taking care of one of our sustainability goals, monitoring that. So thank you very much, Chuck, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Andreas. And well, first of all, happy birthday to IAU. I should say happy birth year, I suppose. But anyway, congratulations to IAU on providing sort of a global collective voice for higher education now for 70 years. And congratulations on producing this book. For something to reach approximately now, I would suppose 150,000 downloads. That's really quite an achievement. Our chapter that co-authored with our chair's executive coordinator, Katrin Cole, is titled Aligning Higher Education's Promise of Well-Being with Sustainability and as a Purpose of Education. It builds on nicely with what Stacy was talking about. Our UNESCO chair, we've been working on reorienting education towards sustainability since 1999. It was the first of the UNESCO chairs that was addressing education and sustainable development. And this essay has given Katrin and I sort of an opportunity to write about some of the big issues that we wrestle with. So I thought that I would just sort of touch on 3 of them in sort of highlighting the chapter. The first one is about how to deal with the concept of sustainability. It's usually perceived in the context of negativity. It's often based on fear and guilt. And we know that fear and guilt do not really inspire people to intrinsically act, over the long term. It kind of comes up with short-term reactions, including denial and a rationalization for inaction, at least at the current time. Maybe we will get to it. The second thing that we tried to deal with is how should sustainability be addressed in formal education? Originally the discussion, do we teach about sustainable development? Or as UNESCO urges, we teach for sustainable development. We get on with it. And so what does that mean? In K through 12 education, it's a little bit easier to embed it. But in higher education, how do you approach it? Is it a discrete elective, or in a faculty or two, or how do you go about it? And then the third thing I'd like to just put a couple of comments out about is the opportunity for higher ed to collectively engage now with the 2030 agenda. You know, so it seems that this chapter follows so nicely with what Stacy was talking about. You know, how do we use higher education in a context of sustainability and moving forward? So, regarding the first issue of negativity, sustainable development has this strong connotation of giving up. And giving up pleasures and happiness, even that what we talk about in the chapters, that we want to conceptually align sustainability differently. So we aligned sustainable development to the more positively received connotations, surrounding the pursuit of well-being. That's sort of been accepted, that with education comes overall well-being, certainly of the individual, but nations pour money into education, their education systems, thinking that will improve the overall well-being of society and so on. So what we're trying to do is to look at the concept of well-being, complex as it is, the well-being of the individual, beyond being well off, but that compact concept of overall well-being of the individual, and then onto the well-being of society, and eventually then onto the well-being of the planet as sort of logical steps that are linked to education. But with sustainability, while it can have a lot in common with societal well-being, it's actually, it should be more aligned with indigenous well-being, of worldviews of well-being rather. Our current concept of sustainable development is so human-centric. So we do need to think of it, because in terms more of understanding indigeneity, where they extend the concept beyond the well-being of humans to address the well-being of all life forms, and in many situations, even beyond life forms, to the heritage of the planet itself, with sacred mountains and sites and so on. And the other thing is the concept of indigeneity has built in intergenerational concepts, that Brundtland called for, but that we really don't see practiced. So, and then the second issue that we tried to address is how sustainability should be seen and addressed in formal education. We see the best fit for sustainability not as another add-on or separate discipline, because it must reach everyone, but rather we see it as a purpose of the world's education and training systems. And so if it is a purpose, then where is it identified? How is it seen? So we feel the pursuit of a sustainable future for all is so important that it must go beyond an elective in a faculty or two, and it really has to touch every student. And to do that, we feel it needs to permeate throughout the whole institution, in its teaching, its research, service, certainly, be it community or global service, and the institution's overall culture as seen in its operations. And thirdly, in our essay, we talk about the opportunity for higher ed to collectively and very visibly engage with the plan to save humanity and the planet. That plan being the 2030 agenda. So now, the concept of higher education serving society certainly isn't new. Even the service of higher education to sustainability itself, it has often been led by IAU And it has deep roots that go back to even before the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992, to Tauwa and Halifax and continue today through the IAU Global Cluster Initiative on higher education and research for sustainable development. But there is an opportunity now to build higher education's relevance even further. The United Nations General Assembly recognizes education for sustainable development is not only crucial to SDG 4, but a key enabler of all the SDGs. So there's now both a need and the opportunity for higher education to work in synergy on a global scale to collectively address those wicked issues that are embedded in the SDGs. And to do so in a way that can transform both the world, but also transform and enhance higher education. So now, undisputedly, the necessity of respecting academic freedom remains central and so on, but the opportunity is there. So, pardon me. So those are some of the ideas in our essay that Catherine and I wrote. But let me stop there and back to you then, Andreas.
Chuck, thank you very much. It really is it's wonderful to hear and read your piece together with Catherine Cole, of course, because it gives you hope, and it is beyond the gloom. It is really a construction. It's constructive because it really shows pathways and how we can really engage and do so with quite some hope and with some positivity indeed. So thank you very, very much for talking us through the 3 parts: concept of sustainability, how to teach towards or for sustainable development, and indeed the opportunities. Thank you. I will now give the floor to Enakshi Singh Gupta, and Enakshi indeed is the director of the Center for Advanced Research in Education at the International Higher Education Teaching and Learning Association, and she is also chair at the Business Department in the American University of Afghanistan, which we know would normally be housed in Kabul. But of course, due to recent developments we all know about, Enakshi is actually in India. And also because the IAU has a global perspective and always has the mandate also to inform all of its members and its stakeholders, we would also like to take maybe 2 or 3 minutes just to hear from Enakshi what the situation is concerning higher education, and particularly the American University of Afghanistan in Kabul. And maybe we can just start with Enakshi on that, and then you will move over to a very fine piece that she had co-authored with Patrick Plessinger and Mandla Makanya, and which is on unlocking the potential of higher education by serving the common good. Again, a title that is very, very promising indeed. Enakshi, but please, if you could just fill us in on what the situation is in Afghanistan at the moment concerning higher education and the universities there, that would be much appreciated. And then I'll leave the floor to you to continue with your presentation. Thank you, Enakshi.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, Hilige. And many congratulations for this wonderful book and giving us the opportunity to publish our essay over here and this opportunity to speak to all of you. As Andreas said, I am connecting from India because we all know that our university, both the campuses, and we had a beautiful campus, 2 campuses on either side of the road, has fallen to Taliban, and 15th August was a very harrowing evening for all of us, where we had to physically, get whatever we could lay our hands on, tear them, shred them, have a bonfire. We destroyed our servers. We have destroyed anything that would associate our students with American University of Afghanistan. It is this kind of emergency situation is not new for us. 2016, the campus was attacked and we lost 17 lives. 2 of our professors were abducted. So we went online much before COVID in 2016, continued with our education. Our mission statement is education must prevail, and we are trying to do that. Then came COVID, and now this is the situation. So we don't have a physical presence anymore. We cannot have endorsement by Ministry of Higher Education in Afghanistan, which means then we are colluding with a Taliban-led association. So we just can't do that. Our students, we are trying to evacuate students, staff, and faculty members. So we are all across the world. Some of our students are with American University of Central Asia, Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. Some of them are with American University of Iraq, Soleimani, Northern Iraq, Kurdistan. And we are trying to have a physical presence in Education City, Doha, Qatar, funded by Qatar Foundation partially. But that's, again, something that we are trying to have at least around 100 students and some faculty and staff members there. Our priority, of course, is to evacuate the women and then the other students and, of course, staff members and faculty members. So most of them, the students who are there in Kabul, and some of my colleagues are also there. So they are in hiding. Yeah, and actually they have actually changed their look. So they're sending us photographs. They are not on any kind of social media where they would be identified with American University. And on-ground situation, the banks are frozen. So basically, even if you have money, you just can't draw more than $200 a week. And so even if you are getting your salary, you can't avail of it. Most of them have lost their jobs because most of my students used to work with, non-profit organization, which were funded by international organizations. So they don't have their jobs anymore. So they're sitting at home. But what we have tried to do, we started our fall semester. First 2 weeks we used as a work study session, basically not teaching as such, but talking to them, getting mental health experts from all across the world to speak to them. I had a wonderful friend from University of Manitoba who came to speak on mental health and addressing such issues, and just to give them some hope, getting them used to to get into the role of, as a student, which is, it's very difficult for them at this point of time when they're in hiding. And I was told that they can't even speak in English. If somebody hears them speaking in English, then their life is at risk. So most of the time we don't see the students online. We don't get to hear the students. They're there, they write in the chat, but the enthusiasm level I would say, is quite high. They all want to study, they want to finish their courses, even if they are in some refugee camps in other places. And that's how we are continuing. And I do hope we can regroup in some place and bring back our students to ourselves. So, future is not that good, not that bright, but we are definitely trying our level best. But will not stop. I mean, all students who are enrolled will continue with their education. And I think Bard College has consented to give their, endorsement in the degree certificates, since we don't have Ministry of Higher Education anymore. So we'll have to figure it out as we go.
Thank you so much, and actually for giving us this update on the situation of Afghanistan. This is really very much appreciated, and I'm sure Hilliche van Lante, who's listening, and everyone else in the International Higher Education, the International Association of Universities, if there's anything we can do, please do reach out to us. We'd be very, very happy to engage. But now I think it would be wonderful also to hear your presentation, and indeed unlocking the potential of higher education by serving the common good. What an ample title to follow up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This essay that we wrote, which was jointly written by Dr. Patrick Blessinger, who is the director of IAGTL, International Higher Education Teaching and Learning Association, and with Professor Mandala Makhana from South African University. So we started talking about education as a common good, and the inclusivity and how education should be valued. And we spoke about that not one size fit all, because we need to take into consideration the uncertainty, the risk, the growth in technology. And we wrote this when COVID pandemic or the situation my university is in, we were not aware of these things, but it seems it became a reality. And so we spoke about education being, whether it's a common good or should we talk about it as a merit good because of the positive externalities that it creates in context of human development and improvement of our people, planet, and of course profit. We traced it a little bit of the history, and we spoke about Humboldtian teaching research method. Then we went into World War II, where professional development and economic development was priority. And then we spoke about technology, and finally we spoke about aligning education with sustainable development goals. And again, going back to the context of American University of Afghanistan, now it seems we have gone back to that stage of World War II, where we are now rethinking our curriculum for professional development so that our students have, marketability of our students all across the world. And if one day they come back to rebuild their country, so we are re-looking at our curriculum to a large extent. And we have debated over there whether it should be a common good or it should be a rights good, because this right to education is something that we have decided is something that we should really need to look into. And we just spoke about, we did not take any case study or any example, but I do hope, if I was in this situation, I would really narrate it and related it to the situation that I am in at this present moment. So I think that's about it. And I think I've crossed my over 5 minutes. So I'll be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Over to you, Andreas.
Thank you, and actually, thank you very much for a quick piece. Thank you so much. Without further ado, we'll pass on. And indeed, we see Adam Habib has joined us, and that is wonderful to see. Welcome, Adam. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Yes, so Adam unfortunately had a further commitment beforehand, but now we're very, very glad to see him here on our screen and celebrating with us the second part of our launch for the Promise of Higher Education. And yeah, without further ado, I'd probably pass the floor to Adam, just informing you that he is the director of the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, indeed, a institution we all well know, and formerly the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Witwatersrand, Wits in South Africa. And I presume you're speaking to us from London today.
I am, and I'm absolutely impressed that you pronounced Witwatersrand as well as you did. We should give you honorary citizenship, South African citizenship in that regard. So congratulations on that. Colleagues, friends, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and my apologies for not being here earlier on. I was pre-scheduled and just couldn't get out of it. So my apologies for that. I caught the last part of the conversation that just happened on, and I'm glad I caught it in Afghanistan. It's something that I think we are concerned about, but I think every person in higher education in the world should be really concerned about, and how we address and assist colleagues in that regard. I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to be very clear and very quickly tell you the substance of the chapter I wrote is really more conceptual. And it starts on the assumption that we are in a new historical moment. And this historical moment means that all of our challenges are transnational in character. I mean, there's no singular better example of it than the pandemic. It doesn't matter how good you are in any country. to resolve the vaccination program, so long as the rest of the world is not appropriately vaccinated, a variant could always emerge that could come and defeat your own country. And the same problem exists with climate change. The same exists with renewable energy, with inequality, or with social and political polarization. Our challenges in this historical moment are truly transnational, and they require global solutions. And for global solutions, you require two things, it seems to me. You require, on the one hand, a global science and technology, a world-class science and technology, but you also require local contextual knowledge. And it's the interaction of the two that allow for real positive effects in a society. The way you deal with Ebola in West Africa was having to understand the context of West Africa and the customs and norms and values and how you operate in that environment. It's not simply about vaccines. It's about how you deploy them and how you deploy them in that country. So local knowledge and global science and technologies come together. The second thing you need is institutions and human capabilities around the world. You can't succeed in addressing pandemics unless you have hospitals and universities and clinics around the world, and you've got doctors and nurses and healthcare workers around the world. It's human capabilities and institutions that you require. Well, if you're going to require that, we got a real problem, because at this historical moment, our global partnerships doesn't enable it. Here's what higher education does. Higher education, and I'm as guilty as everybody else, in the developed world, offers scholarships to talented people from the developing world, brings them over, trains them, and the research shows that more than 80% do not return. Data by Carleton University, discussed at the World Bank, suggests that of the Indian graduates, 80% don't return. Prior to 2006, of Chinese graduates that studied overseas, 90% didn't return. That changed in China after 2006. The only outlier in this is effectively Singapore, which does attract people in sufficient ways, etc. What does all of this mean? It means we have to reimagine higher education, and we have to reimagine it in quite fundamental ways. We have to start thinking about global partnerships in institutional terms rather than in individual terms. And if you're going to do it in institutional terms, it requires a SOAS partnering with the University of Cape Town or Makerere University or the University of Delhi. It requires Harvard partnering with Lagos or Santiago or whatever, but effectively we are required to start teaching in partnership format. Now we've got the digitized technologies that enable that. In part, we need better technologies, but you need to start thinking about co-curriculation, co-teaching, co-credentialing. And frankly, we need to start thinking about research, in building research centers in the South, in getting researchers in the South to be able to develop the questions, to be able to control resources, etc. What does all of this mean? Well, this is an appeal to funders. You're not going to get people like me, vice chancellors, on their own, because we're so focused on the bottom line. We aren't thinking sufficiently imaginatively. And so what we need to do is have funders direct us in particular ways. We need vice chancellors in the developed world to think differently, not only focus on our short-term, but also our medium and long-term goals. We need world leaders, political leaders in all of our countries to have a more magnanimous interpretation of solidarity and how to kind of link our national and international obligations. And we need international institutions to push us there. Because I promise you, at the moment, we're weakening institutions in the developing world and we're undermining human capabilities. And so long as we do that, we put our collective humanity at risk. And so that's the message, and that's the call, a plea to start looking at the medium to long term than simply the short term. And it's a plea to reimagine higher education. Thank you.
Adam, very succinct, very, very strong words. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much also for giving us that perspective. Unfortunately, Ahmed Legrouri from the University of in Côte d'Ivoire, he could not make it, unfortunately. He's from the University of Grand Bassam in Côte d'Ivoire. So it's wonderful that you're also speaking there for giving us also an African perspective, indeed, even though you're sitting in London. And yes, you put it very, very clear. We are in a situation in which global partnerships, even though we are aspiring towards them, and even though our rhetoric very often in the higher education institution world is thus as though we are engaging and that we're all very hopeful and we're actually doing this, but in actual fact, where are those partnerships? Exactly as you were saying, where are those partnerships with Lagos? Where are the partnerships with the University of Dar es Salaam? Of course, they are there to a certain degree, but they must probably substantially change in order to really have more impact. Thank you very much. We'll talk about that in a moment. But very, very, I'm so glad that Roberta is speaking now, because of course she is very much on top of exactly some of these themes, speaking as the global lead for tertiary education and senior education specialist at the World Bank. Yes, I don't think I have to say much more. You can dig right in, because these are themes I'm sure are very, very close to your heart. Roberta, you wrote a very entertaining piece, I have to say, and it was from university to multiversity to omniversity, HEIs as hubs for dynamic development. And I remember it as probably the most futuristic piece of the whole book. And it is a very, very interesting think piece. And we're very glad that you will be speaking to us about this now. But I'm sure the themes that Adam has just raised will also come up in the discussion afterwards. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Roberta. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andreas, and thank you to Hilary and Diana as well for the invitation to participate in this book. Can you hear me okay? I mean, I am sitting in the quietest place I could find in an airport, so I'm doing the best I can, but maybe this helps, I don't know. Yeah, so when I was given this charge to write this piece, I actually was wearing two hats. One is I used to be, in my previous life, a higher education researcher, that my studies were all in higher education, and I used to be able to just think about higher education very sort of broadly, futuristically. And then the other hat I wore is as the global lead for tertiary education at the bank, and thinking about the trends that we see and what we're hearing from our client countries and what kind of supports they're seeking from us as we help them with their reform initiatives on the ground. And so in those two minds coming together, I did write this piece thinking about what has happened to the institutions, especially the wealthy institutions, the innovative institutions around the world through the COVID pandemic. What kinds of metamorphoses have they embraced as they've gone through this transformation to online learning? Most of the institutions weren't even thinking about delivery in that mode, especially the highest ranked institutions, the flagship institutions that were more than satisfied with the way that they were delivering their curriculum prior to the pandemic, forcing them to change. In light of that, in light of this idea that they now have faculty who can deliver their courses online, many of these institutions are rethinking their global audience, their global position. And so this is where my piece was coming from. In the idea that the university, when it was first formed, was mostly focused on teaching and research. And then Clark Kerr, when he was developing his idea of the multiversity, spoke about the role of universities as economic hubs and economic drivers. Where I was taking this piece was to the next level, which is universities as global hubs, global connective centers for all forms of education delivery. And that can include the entirety of the spectrum of post-secondary education. It can include offering short-term micro-credentials all the way up to doctoral studies. The students could be on campus or off campus. It can be something like an Amazon, right? A big Amazon university for the world, that they can access the product that they're seeking in a university marketplace of some form, but contained under a hub umbrella that allows for some quality assurance and quality control, some sense of uniformity of vision, the same sort of mission of ideal, education at a high level, research-based learning, things like this. All of the things that universities pretend or portend to do. But in the omniversity, they would do this on a global scale. And we've seen this. I teach in an institution that's based in the US, one course a year, just because I like it and it's interesting. And my students last year were in every time zone. I live in Switzerland. I was able to teach, at an East Coast US institution. And none of us needed to be based on campus. And that model, which was completely unique for the institution at the time, is going to be the model that they continue into the future. They'll have on campus and off. And that's going to be quite transformative to how they deliver, to who they see as their audience. And they're not going to be alone. All of these institutions have had a big mental shift about who their constituent groups can be. And that's the idea of what the Omniversity was in that space. In thinking about this in the context of my work at the World Bank, we just released a new policy advisory note, which we're using to sort of direct dialogues with our client countries in the post-COVID environment. And one of the key pillars of this strategy is about strategically diversified systems. And when we talk about this and we talk about all forms of post-secondary tertiary education, from the micro-credentials and the community colleges all the way through world-class research universities, what differentiates our model and what we're trying to discuss more and more with governments is this idea that articulation is as important as the existence of these diverse institutions, that those who study at one need to be able to access and have pathways to the others, should they be prepared for those, should that be an aspiration that they have, and that the system allows for this form of entrance and exit, different pathways through a lifetime of learning. And we see well-diversified systems in a lot of countries. They have multiple forms of institutions, but the articulation part is often missing. And so that again goes to, well, what would that look like? It might look like an omniversity. It might look like they enter a single institution and the pathways are actually through the multiple forms of delivery within one institution. I know the University of Hawaii actually has their community college system built into the University of Hawaii system, which allows for that articulation. The California Master Plan obviously was an environment like that as well at its heyday, or in its theoretical design. But we don't see it, in its, I think, what we would see as an idealized form today. And that's something that we would love to encourage countries to think about more and to be working towards as they continue to reform their sectors. So anyway, I'll stop there. That was my piece, and also where it fits in with the World Bank's work right now.
Thank you, Roberta. Thank you for those thoughts. Envisioning a future for the higher education landscape. It is very, very interesting, this concept of an omni-university, which of course, if you look at the word university, the universitas, the universality of knowledge, it is something that is supposed to encompass the whole globe. And at the same time, we know that universities are diverse, and the diversity of it as well. And how that juxtaposition, that tension, that is a very interesting one. I'm sure we'll be discussing that in a moment. Without further ado, I would like to bring to the floor Hillige van 't Land, who is the Secretary General of the IAU, who has very kindly volunteered to take over the question and answer session. So I hope all of you out there who are listening in and viewing this, please come in with your questions. And I think we also have the possibility of bringing you onto the screen. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Hillige.
Well, thank you very much. Difficult to add to such good presentations. Thank you very much to all the speakers for your proposed transformation of higher education. I see a trend in the presentations as were made. There were many references to sustainable development as a central piece of the transformation of higher education today. Also, this call strongly made for a better connection between university and society, how to serve it in a different way. A very compelling call by Stacy to engage with SD in a different way by embedding SD at all the different levels of the institution. But I don't know, Stacy, you were about to leave, and so I won't pose the question to you because I know you have to travel and to travel soon. And then Adam, your call for really a transformative approach to the partnership. So maybe you called on the donors, you called on the different universities around the world to rethink the way in which they work together. I think, Chuck, most of your work has been around that as well, in a different form slightly, but still calling also for a different vision of how universities actually work with each other around the world. And actually in most of your work as well, you refer to that. But I would like to come back to you, Adam, and maybe say a little bit more about that, and maybe possibly look at this notion of omniversity that was brought to the virtual table by Roberta, because it's looking at the university as a universe, also connecting to the universe in a different way. So maybe you could pick up on the ideas there and elaborate a little bit on the ideas that you brought to the table.
So thank you very much again. I broadly agree with Roberta. I think that as she defines the omniversity, it's basically imagining the institutions as global hubs, and that neatly dovetails with what I am in part saying. Here's the challenge. I think that these can take two pathways. The one, as Roberta suggested, is the model of the University of California system or the University of Hawaii, where you bring the various institutional mandates under a single banner. But you can also craft that in different other national settings outside an institutional banner. So one of the things that is quite worthwhile looking at is places like Finland and many of the Scandinavian, where the similar mandates are in different institutional banners, but effectively pathways are crafted where you can start at one institution and actually end up in a completely different institution. And so you can move by starting into vocational training, but if you develop the interest or the capacities, you can move on to more traditional forms. So for me, I think that I'm broadly supportive of that. I think our increase, if you are going to be thinking about SDGs, you have to start thinking about multidisciplinarity. You got to thinking about broadly outside the traditional disciplines. And those disciplines are important, but you can't stop there. You have to go beyond them. Having said that, I do think that, I believe in, I have a term which is a kind of radical pragmatism. Radical is important. We need to be committed to social justice. But pragmatism is, we got to be working in the real world. And whether you like it or not, if you're in the middle of the United States and you have 20,000 universities, and if you go to many institutes in countries in Africa, you have 2 or 3. And so in a sense, those places just do not have the institutional capacity to be able to deliver what a higher education system in the US would be able to do. And so we should, as a collective global community, be saying, it is in our interest to make sure that we assist those countries to develop their institutional capacity, not by taking their people and bringing them here, but working with their existing institutions to build their capacities, to offer joint training, to offer joint this thing, because that is in our interest. The more medical doctors emerge there, the more researchers and innovators emerge there, the more easy it will be to deal with the local manifestations of climate change, or the local manifestations of pandemics, or the local manifestations of how to address renewable energy. You can't address any of those things without multidisciplinarity, but without human capabilities. And that means, now, if you're going to ask SOAS, the vice director of SOAS is so worried about his financial statements at the end of the year, that you've got to push him. You got to make sure that he pushes the boundaries. And part of that is vice chancellors and directors love money more than anything else. So if you can get funders to put money in a particular way, or if you can get the World Bank to start demanding that political leaders start thinking about this in more imaginative terms, to force the British government to have a more imaginative approach to solidarity with the rest of the world. Otherwise, it won't achieve its climate change agenda. Then you're beginning to open up the parameters of the conversation. And I think we, in stage one of a fundamental shift, the problem with many of the top institutions in the developed world is they become comfortable. They think they are what it should be. I have a rude, this thing that I want to say, and I'll shut up at this. I think they're out of step with the realities of the 21st century. Higher education has to be fundamentally reimagined. And that conversation is not a conversation of the developing world. It needs to be a conversation in the developed world. And that's what I think we should be opening up the conversation.
Yeah, wonderful. I listened very carefully to your first part as well, and to the parts that Chuck and Akshi and Roberta brought in together with Stacy as well. I was wondering about one other thing. So all of this can be reimagined and transformed. I was wondering as well if the students are ready and if the staff is ready. For a simple reason, I'm thinking, for instance, about the whole transformation that is taking place in Europe, as an example. Not because we're based here, but because we're faced with that all the time, also in the context of the development of our World Higher Education Database, how to really reflect all the transformations that are taking place now. It's a nightmare, I can tell you. But just to take that example, what's happening now, you have two things. You have all these communautés d'universités, so these universities that come together and cluster and transform and try to bring about these bridges that you're talking about and calling for students to be able to move between universities, etc. Then there are these alliances in Europe, these European alliances called for by Macron a few years ago, now becoming reality. There are some 20 now in Europe, also generating this new dynamic. And I make the movement here even of trying to revisit the way in which these universities work together. So it's in one continent, one region, and we already see how incredibly difficult it is, but what the challenges are. And then what was really fascinating for me to see recently is for the students even to imagine their capacity to benefit and to grasp the opportunities. Some of the students are ready for it and they can, but who is actually ready for it? Who's able to move between countries, to grasp the opportunities offered for transdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, multiculturality, because you have to then move from Sweden to Italy, from Italy to Switzerland, France, etc. So you move around countries and you have to generate a kind of program that will then ensure that you will have a job later. So is society ready? Because then you have to have the parents behind, you have to have the government. So it's at a continental level. Then you would have the same idea of, and I really liked your text as well, Roberta, on this coming together and bringing these universities in a different setting, or in actually when you say we have to unlock the potential in a different way, all talking to this call for transformation, which has been the 40 years of work of Chuck as well, to transform from within. And where's that resistance coming from? From different parts. So the system itself, of course, for the people who've been taught into it in the very competitive dynamics that form part of the universities today, this incapacity we have to really move sincerely towards collaboration, because that's as well what I find really tough, where we have these partnerships that are being built north, south, east, west, name it. And then, is it always sincere? Are we as human beings able to do that? So a big question, because also for having been in the game for more than 20 years, I see that there's so many of these dynamics that want to do that, and we're still not there. So who would wish to say something about that? Where is the bottleneck? Roberta.
Well, I'll just say that it it really varies based on the region. This is something Adam was saying as well. I'm working technically on leading projects in East Africa predominantly for the last few years. And I would say, in a context where the tertiary education access rate is about 9%, in most of the countries where I'm working, the reluctance isn't, that there's this massive amount of people who are demanding some change. It's a small amount of students who are just trying to access the next level of something that they believe is going to bring them an outcome that they've been working their whole lives towards. But it's a very small group of people. And then the administrative structures and the policy environments are very self-fulfilling almost. It's the same group of people who train their successors, they become the ministers. It's a very cyclical space where there isn't a lot of external dynamism that is pressing on the administrative structures or the policy structures to reform. And your question, which I like so much, and is something that I talk about a lot in my work, is the student-centric part of this process. Are we thinking enough about the student and what student development theory tells us about what students need to learn effectively and to be happy and to be satisfied at different stages of their lives as they work their way through learning pathways? We're balancing this idea that students do have some psychosocial norms that we really need to support, at the same time that we're pushing hard these transformative changes, and we want every country to be aware of them and pacing that change in the most dynamic ways. And these are often, there are just so many forces that are working in conflict, and you see it especially in the developing world when we are, as Adam was saying, we really are pushing governments hard to think about reforming their sectors for the world that the students are entering and not the one that the faculty started in. And that's a huge difference. But in that space, there's so much tension that's really difficult for us to be managing, and to have enough evidence and enough sort of narratives that are convincing to make the policies move in the right direction.
Yeah. And so as I know, I've seen you work for so many years in that, Roberta, it's not impossible, but it is true that it is an enormous amount of work. Same, Adam, I will give the floor back to you in a minute. But I would wish to hear from Enakshi as well, with this university that was built in a country where there was hope for transformation, and then we see what's happening today. So as you said, I retweeted one of your sayings: education will not stop, but at what cost and how? So there's also those movements where there is a wish to transform, there's a will to, and then you have the political context, and you have this and that. It should not prevent us from continuing that quest for this real transformation. That is, you're right, Adam. We need that. We need to transform it. Otherwise, the world will go to its end before we even have the time to say so. But how to do it more strongly, and how to put it on the agendas even more strongly, and make it happen, make this transformation happen in action.
Taking from what Roberta has said, student-centered. So we did an exercise with our students and asked them to imagine an university which is not there, but they continue with their education. So there was two groups of students, 64 of them, and we told them to imagine an university and name that university. So they came up with a very interesting name called Inversity. So we asked, and we wanted them to talk about 3 things that you would like to keep, 3 things you would like to improve, and 3 things that you would like to drop. So this was also a part of Global Education Forum Challenge. So this Inversity was something which they imagined, which will be totally internet based. So that's where the name in comes from. Also inverted university, where the physical space is not going to have the topmost position anymore. It could be an university from anywhere, as our students are now this thing. So what is the priority that they were trying to give was the good faculty member, curriculum which is going to help them to adapt to this situation. So the curriculum needs to be re-looked at. There are a lot of things which are not possible anymore in the context of Afghanistan. So a curriculum which will help their marketability and help them to get jobs wherever they are going. And also, as you said about the multicultural perspective, these are, and mainly the Afghan women, and now going into Kyrgyzstan, which has a bit of, old Russian culture. And also in Iraq, Kurdistan is a little different from Afghanistan, now maybe in Doha. So that cultural, how do we, I won't say train them, but how do we get them adjusted to that culture? How do we tell them that this is how it's going to be for the next maybe 2 semesters or 3 semesters down the line? And the language, most of them who have just arrived in Bishkek, they want to take up Russian language as one of their, subject, which is not there in their degree plan, but they want to, because they want to be a part of that country now. So that is thing that we are looking into, and for the very near future, maybe a year, 2 years down the line, this is how American University of Afghanistan is going to function, with students in at least 3, 4, or 5 places. We are trying to have some students with Bard College also. So, and how 3 or 4 universities can work together, prepare the curriculum, yet have that, that Afghan-centric, not to forget the history, not to forget the culture, and that's how we are trying to plan our curriculum. So,
yeah, thank you so much. Chuck, would you like to come in on these questions?
Yeah, I have greater hope, I think, for radical change and so on for Afghanistan than I have for Canada. When I think about if we are really going to bring about some sort of fundamental, useful change, I think we need crisis, we need leadership, we need possibility, that people believe there is possibility. We need some resources, and I look at technology, sort of the possibility that we didn't have before of online learning, that sort of thing. And so I think if we could look at what are the elements that are at work in Afghanistan, and then try and transpose that into other situations. Now, I'm looking in Canada for what are the possibilities? What is the crisis? What can we do? And how can we translate the sustainable development goals into local sustainable development goals? And then bring it down to the manageability of how can we transform in a whole institution approach our own university? Pardon me. How do we engage faculty? Are you relevant at all, and so on? Because one of the big problems that we have, of course, it's a blessing about academic freedom, is also an excuse kind of for inertia. So the idea of pardon me, the idea of identifying what are the problems with sustainable development as a concept. It's the best we could come up with in the mid-1980s to get half of the world's leaders who were despots at the time and tyrants to buy into something and collectively come up with an idea. But we can see ahead that by 2030, the current implementation plan of the Sustainable Development Goals will be over. So what we need to be thinking now almost of as higher education, if we're forecasting forward, what should be the next version? We had the Millennium Development Goals. Before that, we had Agenda 21. Now we have the Sustainable Development Goals. What is next? How can we engage our faculty in the great vision and then say, okay, how can we make it work on our own campus? And try, I love Adam's radical pragmatism. How can we at least work in our own campus, in our own community, in our own sphere of influence, and move on? But I think in trying to bring together in a concerted effort of bringing different faculty together to work collectively, you know, because it mirrors the sustainable development goals don't work if you just work on 17, you know, or well, 17 is probably the best, but if you just work on 4 in isolation, or you work on 6 or 8, you know, they are intertwined. And so what we have to do is to use our universities as a collective response to what, not only what is the knowledge, the research and so on, but what is emerging, and I'll close with this idea of, is education for sustainable development isn't enough. We need to create that global citizenship perspective. You know, that idea of actually getting engaged and doing something for the common good in a feeling that what you are doing is meaningful and so on. So yeah, that's sort of my initial response.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to look back to you, Adam. You said higher education has to be fundamentally reimagined. So that's what we've talked to. We have to be more imaginative, more cooperation. There's a need for a fundamental shift. And then you said we have to also work in the real world. Yes, so by working in the real world is also trying to find the solutions for the future. So one of the areas of work that has gained much more attention recently is QA. So it's quality assurance and the recognition dynamics of diplomas between countries and around the globe. Do you believe that, for instance, the Global Convention on the Recognition of Higher Education Qualifications will change something and will help us move in that direction, where we will be able to use that as a tool to really push push the boundaries, as you also said, and make sure that we dare to move into a different direction when it comes to building partnerships, when it comes to building connections around the world, when it comes to recognizing what is valuable and what is not, etc., etc. So. Yeah, I think more questions, but I leave the floor to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, and I want to come to that, but I want to just pick up what you picked on earlier, and I really liked what Inakshi said. But here's the context. You spoke about the European experience, and it's a powerful experience, and it's a learning experience. But the European experience was in part constructed on physical space. Yeah. What post-COVID has brought to the fore is the possibility of a blended learning space, some physical and some online. And I think that's emerged. Now, if you came in both universities I've been at in the last, over the period of the COVID, both WITS and SOAS, if you were a year before COVID, you would have had huge opposition from many staff around the possibility of online. That's completely changed, simply because people had no option. And so in a sense, despite all of the other problems, there's an advance made. That's the first striking thing. And it seems to me we need to build off this. And we need to build off the reimagination of kind of that has happened in practice. I mean, how many of us knew seriously about MS Teams and Zoom? Now, there isn't anybody in a university that doesn't operate without at some part of their lives being touched by MS Teams and Zoom, etc. So that's part one, which is a positive feature. Second is students are quite keen on a more universalistic understanding. And actually, we've had one of the big pushes that we have from students during the pandemic was we want our study abroad. You know, we do a lot of programs on languages, etc., and the humanities. And part of that had quite a significant component about going abroad. And part of the students was a demand that they want to go abroad. And we're finding programs that have scholars from multiple areas, bringing the local and the global together are far more attractive in the international students. Think about it. In SOAS, we've had our international applications go up by 39%. Now, part of the problem of that is the fact that students not only want to do that because SOAS is such a lovely place and they love Bloomsbury, it's also because people think that we can access the global economy by getting a British degree or an American degree or a European degree. And that's a dangerous thing at one level. It's important at one level, but it's also dangerous because if you simply let that play out, the inequalities of our world will allow the institutions of the developing world to be increasingly weakened. And that's why the push to offer transnational co-credentialing is actually addressing the very inequality within which we're located and works against the trend that is likely to happen. None of this will happen unless we bite the challenge of quality assurance. And I think the global recognition agreements that are emerging are important because it forces universities to start and compelling them to start taking this seriously. Every time I speak about transnational learning programs at SOAS or WITS, my colleagues automatically say, but what about quality assurance? How can I be sure that what is being taught at the opposite side is something that I'm satisfied with? And in part, there's a legitimacy to that. In part, there's an academic chauvinism to that. And we've got to have an honest conversation about both elements in that. And so I think the accord takes us some way, but it's got to not go far enough unless we forces us to have frank debates in the institutions of the developed world. It's people like myself saying, let's call out academic chauvinism where it needs to be. Let's call out, but let's also have the courage to talk about where there are serious quality assurance problems and see what are pragmatic ways to address them. And I think we do need an honest conversation on this. I think that's, if you like, the biggest obstacle. And I think that's the obstacle that we need. That's the problem that we need to resolve. Because if you get through that together with the technologies opens up the space in a way that is far more imaginative and far more thoughtful for the 21st century.
Yep. Roberta, would you like to react to it? And actually, Chuck?
I would actually, I agree wholeheartedly with all of those points. I think one of the points that Adam made that I think is going to be, that was part of my thinking about the Omniversity, and I do think it's going to be part of the future, is that these institutions that can offer degrees online to students from their home countries can do so in a way that does not remove that student from the home country and still gives them access to a Harvard or an Oxford or a SOAS or wherever degree program. There is a real benefit in terms of brain drain concerns, which is something that I was just talking about with a group of students in Lagos yesterday. What do we do about stemming brain drain in Africa? This is like a gazillion-dollar question. If I had an answer, I wouldn't have to work anymore. But this is one of those things, one of those opportunities that this new transformation of delivery modes can actually support on the ground is access to high quality education that doesn't remove the most talented students from their home countries in the way that it has historically had. And so, some thoughtfulness around that is going to be really important, though, of course, the benefits to the receiver countries will never be something that university leaders will get rid of very quickly. I mean, there are huge benefits to bringing the most talented people to your campus, keeping them there, and then bringing them into the society where your institution lives. It's where the credibility comes from for your institutions. And, that also is going to be a real tension. But we worry about this a lot, about the talent loss, about talent circulation in a way that is beneficial to the home country as much as possible, especially when we're trying to work with governments to sustain their funding models for their higher education and tertiary education systems. If students leave and they leave in large numbers, where's the incentive to maintain their higher education systems? And this is something that we fight strongly to support, that they keep doing it, because eventually economies can catch up, but it's a tension for sure.
Yeah, it's the same with the staff leaving. or staff going abroad and coming back with ideas that are not accepted when back. So there are many of these issues that we're conscious of time. I see that I overspent my time, but I would like to give you 1 minute, and actually still, and Chuck as well, since you're lead in the IAU Global Cluster on SDG 4, so education, if you can take 1 minute each. Otherwise, the moderator will probably fire me before the end of the session. And actually,
yeah, thank you so much. And I have worked in Iraq before I was in Afghanistan. So I think this is the solution, the Omni University, because for students from Yemen or Syria or any other part getting affected, how do they study? How do they move? The mobility is restricted for them. To mention here, Islamophobia is there. So in that case, I think this is a wonderful solution. Yes, there are things that needs to be looked into. Quality assurance is one. Getting instructors, which is one of our main problem, to work online because of different time zones. So we have university professors who are teaching at 3 a.m. in the morning. So these kind of things we need to look into it, but I think this is what the future is going to be. Thank you.
And makes me think that one point that you all are working on, which was maybe not clear enough here, is that the QA needs obviously to be resonating with the needs locally, and so it needs not to be defined by one part of the world against the other part, because quality is really something that has to resonate with the local dynamics as well. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So, Chuck, 1 minute.
Yeah. The whole idea of internationalization, really needs to be explored again with the new possibilities of Zoom and so on. Even in preparing not just the staff to accept quality assurance and suspect of what's going on, but we also need to prepare students and to be able to put things in context. The idea of first impressions and so on, as we open up and start zooming around the world, we have to be very careful about how we do it. One of the things we're finding in North America is that students are concerned about sustainability and use it as a way of saying, well, I can learn about Afghanistan online. I don't need to go. And so understanding the difference between the map and the place when you actually get there, there is a huge difference. So those are some of the things that I think with the work, that we're doing with IAU in our ongoing research into sustainability on the go program, is trying to have a better understanding of internationalization. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. I cannot say more because time has gone off, and it's only a starter of a conversation that needs much more, as you've all said. And Adam, I've heard your plea and need for a frank debates. And the need for honest conversations about all of this. And I think that those in this webinar today are definitely committed to that. So let's continue the good conversations. Andreas, the floor is back to you. No, you're muted.
I am muted indeed. It's one of these technological things that I think we'll also have to have an honest conversation about. How often have we heard that this year? Thank you very, very much for this really, really stimulating debate today. And I have to say there's so much in common. And actually with this new model that you're facing, even though against your will, obviously, but there is a silver lining. There is a lot of innovation. There is an international, transnational, and yet with a very local mission model coming up, and they're developing that, and we'll be learning a lot from you soon, hopefully, on how that is going. Roberta, your Omni University, pulling it all together, very much the debate today, what is a university in a global setting? And Adam, yes, your plea for truly impactful, truly meaningful partnerships, again, with the connection of local knowledge and the connection to global science, which brings you to Chuck with your very constructive and positive engagement with sustainable development, that there is actually hope if we engage. And really, I have to applaud and commend you for your many decades in rattling the cage and telling us all beyond the higher education landscape and within to engage in sustainable development more meaningful way. I have the honor of closing this, and thank you very much, Roberta. I hope you have a very pleasant and a good voyage onwards to Lugano. Charles, have a very good day in Canada. Adam, very many big thanks in London. And we all know, I think we're in the same climate zone. I'm just looking out at the Eiffel Tower. It can hardly be seen. It is in clouds and in rain, and it's very autumnal here. So we hope that you and actually in India, at least with all the global and local problems that you're facing, I hope at least you've got the weather on your side, which is a very Irish way of ending this conversation today. Thank you very much for all of you all being there. Thank you. Bye-bye.